Ralph Nader rose to prominence as a consumer advocate, urging his fellow Americans to imagine a safer and more just world. He did so in the courts, in the media, and by running for president 3 times, most memorably in the year 2000. Today, he is 82 years old and still working for profound change, as evidenced by his most recent book, Animal Envy, a Fable. And in light of the recent upset in the U.S. presidential race, we thought it would be particularly timely to welcome back Ralph Nader to our studio for his take on these tumultuous times. I'm sorry to out you as an octogenarian there, but you are, and still going strong at 82. I got to have your take on what America said on November 8th. What do you think they said?
It said Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. That's the only country I know in the world where you can win the popular vote and lose the office.
Well, here too. It happens here too.
Yeah. But it happens with this electoral college, sort of a dead hand from the past. James Madison did a lot of good things, but this was not one of them.
You say she won the popular vote, which is an accurate statement, but she did lose the election. There was something about her, though, wasn't there, that people just weren't cottoning on to?
Yeah, that was Donald Trump's greatest asset, is the liabilities that she brought to the race. And if you ask most people who were for Donald Trump, they would say, I don't like the things he's been saying, the way he treats women, but I can't stand Hillary. I can't stand Hillary. And he reaffirmed that by saying, you know, crooked Hillary, crooked Hillary. And he knew the power of a moniker. He knew the power of a 5-word sentence. And the Democrats didn't. They never applied a moniker to him. I even wrote a column suggesting cheating Donald, because he's cheated his shareholders, his creditors, his workers, his consumers, his taxpayers, as a failed gambling czar who turned into a corporate welfare king. They didn't use the material that they had. They wanted to rise above it. But when he keeps day after day saying crooked Hillary and lock her up, and the press repeats it, you see, day after day, it begins sinking in.
When Trump got the Republican nomination, did you ever have a moment where you thought, this guy could win?
I must say no. I did write a column in June 2015 when he threw his hat in the ring. And I said, he's going to give the Republican Party nightmares. Because at the time, he was viewed just as a sort of clownish character, a boaster who wanted to increase the value of his Trump brand, his hotels, his casinos, and so forth. Well, you know, in a 17-person race, it was easy to rise to prominence because everybody knew him from the Apprentice program and other media. But I didn't think he could defeat the Democrats. But the Democratic Party has been unable to defend our country against the worst, most ruthless Republican Party in its 164-year history. I mean, I'm saying on the record here of what they passed the House of Representatives against women, bills against children, against food safety, against auto safety, down with worker safety, more military budget, Wall Street over Main Street, on. And you would think after a while that would sink them. But the Democratic Party is inept, partly because they have the same leadership, has never changed. They're losers again and again in the Congress.
It's going to change now.
Yeah.
It's going to change now.
Yeah, and partly or largely because they're dialing for the same commercial dollars for their campaigns.
Had they picked Bernie Sanders instead of Hillary Clinton, would that have been different?
Yeah, of course.
Would he have won?
Well, first of all, he's scandal-free. Second, straight talk, right? Third, he overlaps with some of Trump's votes. They would try to go after him as a democratic socialist, but that's not washing anymore because he comes from one of the most conservative states, Vermont, and they love him and they keep reelecting him. So obviously he's not much of a radical in that sense. I think he would have won.
There is a presidential historian at McGill University in Montreal named Gil Troy, who wrote that on Election Day, Senator Bernie Sanders earned the 2016 Ralph Nader Award for the leftist most responsible for helping Republicans win the presidency. First of all, do you love having an award named after you like that?
No, it's total nonsense. Factually deprived is the most kind phrase I can apply to that. First of all, he strengthened her. He gave her a base. He totally endorsed her. He campaigned for her when he lost because of the rigged system of the Democratic Party favoring Hillary, which has been pretty well documented. So he strengthened her. I mean, she would have had fewer votes without Bernie Sanders.
Well, here's Gil Troy's reasoning for why Bernie could have done a better job. He says Sanders' insurgency pushed her, Hillary Clinton, too far left to prevent an effective recentering in the fall while goading her into wooing different constituencies rather than uniting the nation. The suggestion, I guess, being that she went after a whole bunch of different segments of the pie rather than the whole pie.
But he was trying to go for the whole pie.
He was.
He focused on blue-collar workers more than she did, and then he incorporated his support in that manner. But the most important misconception in that comment is the word centrist and far left. I mean, is Bernie Sanders far left when all he wants to do is bring the minimum wage to what it would have been if it was adjusted from inflation from 1968? Full Medicare for all, is that really radical? You have it here, free choice of doctor and hospital. Law and order against corporate crime, against consumers and workers and the environment. I mean, you know, rule of law. I mean, he's a New Deal Democrat. Franklin Delano Roosevelt would have loved him. What's going on here at McGill?
Well, it's a different province, don't ask me. Here's a take by Thomas Frank, the author of What's the Matter with Kansas, who writes, there is a hidden continuity between Obama's campaign in 2008 and the Trump campaign. The Obama campaign was about hope, and Obama really smashed that hope. What swept the nation after that was disillusionment. Trump's angry, bitter appeal was nevertheless resonating. It's hope after curdling for 8 years. Do you agree that at some level, Obama's presidency made Trump's presidency possible?
Yeah, sure. Simply because he was more corporate than he should have been. He was very slow on the minimum wage. I mean, we're talking, Steve, 30 million people, 30 million workers who make less today than workers made in 1968. That's a huge constituency. And he finally started talking about it in 2012, but not with that much fervor. So that's an example. He also stubbed his toe on Obamacare by not having a public option, that is, government-funded insurance to compete.
Couldn't get it through Congress.
Yeah, well,
Joe Lieberman wouldn't let him have it.
Yeah, well, he signaled he was going to drop it before he even started negotiating with Congress. In other words, he didn't try to take transformational leadership on it. And that's leading to huge rises in premiums, as you know, by the insurance companies. That weakened them.
There's no question, I think among most fair-minded observers, that Donald Trump ran one of the most, pick your adjective. I mean, it was a gross campaign, it was a destructive campaign, it was a harsh campaign. But here is Donald Trump after finding out that he's about to become the next president. Let's roll this clip.
I've gotten to know our country so well, tremendous potential. It's going to be a beautiful thing. Every single American will have the opportunity to realize his or her fullest potential. The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer. We are going to fix our inner cities and rebuild our highways, bridges, tunnels, airports, schools, hospitals. We're going to rebuild our infrastructure, which will become, by the way, second to none. And we will put millions of our people to work as we rebuild it. America will no longer settle for anything less than the best. We must reclaim our country's destiny and dream big and bold and daring. We have to do that. We're going to dream of things for our country, and beautiful things and successful things once again.
That was the president-elect at about 3 o'clock in the morning, Wednesday morning after the Tuesday night election.
Yeah.
A very different tone.
Yeah.
Does that make you that tone make you any more hopeful?
That's just a cruel fantasy. He's a merchant of phony dreams. And by the way, I don't refer to him as the president-elect. I refer to him as the minority president-elect. Steve, look at the arithmetic. He wants to cut taxes. He wants to increase the military budget. Where's he going to get the money for all this? Number one. Number two, he's surrounded himself, judging by his appointments of a national security advisor, head of the CIA, a Justice Department, with the most right-wing extremist warmongering people. They're interested in two things: the empire and attacking wherever they can attack, regardless of the Constitution or international law, and surveillance of Americans. So he's already showed his hand, which belies his tongue.
He's a pretty isolationist guy, though. He says, I mean, admittedly, he said something to Howard Stern a number of years ago about whether to go into Iraq. But he says now Iraq was wrong, Libya was wrong. Sounds like he wants the Allies to pick up a lot more of the freight. Does that suggest he's going to have a much more modest foreign policy
Not
than
at all.
George W. Bush?
No, because he's already appointed people who want to unravel the Iran nuclear deal. I mean, that is deadly. That's like a time bomb if they do that. And he has shown the adversaries abroad that the U.S. is completely vulnerable because it's headed by a bruised ego maniac who lashes out. And if we have one or two major terrorist attacks, stateless terrorist attacks in the U.S., then he becomes a monster just because of his emotional instability. And what we all have to do, Canada included, is find ways to moderate him, foresee what he's doing, foreshadow what he's doing. He has an ego. Maybe he has to be lifted up and praised, you know.
Well, here's what Bernie Sanders said.
Yeah.
You want to talk praise? If Mr. Trump has the guts to stand up to those corporations, he will have an ally in me. Is there room on, I mean, it sounds like there is some room on this Venn diagram where Trumpism and Sandersism, Naderism intersect.
Well, there is room, but he's the one who can close out the door, and he's starting already with his appointments. His appointments actually are so shocking that the worst scenario of the Democrats of who he'd appoint has been realized. And it's just beginning. Wait until you see who appoints other top. He's got an oil and gas people moving in on the Department of Energy and EPA. People don't believe in climate change. It's man-made. He's got warmongering, warfare mentality people moving in on the Pentagon. He's marginalizing prudent ex-military security people, whom he could have chose. People who are prudent, who have experience in government, but don't think that we should be an empire of perpetual war.
Well, Barack Obama, after meeting him for an hour and a half in the Oval Office, said this is not an ideologue, this is a more pragmatic guy, and they had a good meeting together.
Sure, it's wish fulfillment. But I would urge President Obama to have more meetings before he leaves the presidency with Donald Trump and give him some sagacious advice. And one of the most important is, do not take world events seriously and personally. You can take them seriously, but if you take them personally, you're going to lash out and you'll never be able to recover from the consequences, and it'll boomerang right back on this country. And you know, once there's these attacks, everything else that we're concerned about to improve in the U.S. is crowded out. It's crowded out of the media. It's crowded out of Congress. We are very prone to a collective nervous breakdown because the war on terror is one of the most profitable things that the U.S. is doing. It's contracts, it's grants, it's sending soldiers overseas, muting defense, shutting down the Democratic Party's opposition. That's what happened with the invasion of Iraq, a criminal invasion.
Okay, let's get out of the headlines of the day and talk about your book,
Yes.
Animal Envy, a Fable.
Yes.
Americans have clearly showed us that they're a very divided society, and here's a new statistic I had not seen until looking into it here. 80% of Trump voters don't know a single Clinton voter, and 60% of Clinton voters don't know a single Trump voter. Talk about being in your own echo chamber. Your book, which I have to say I really enjoyed, it was a very lovely read. You imagine humans putting aside their differences in order to listen to animals for 100 hours. So what do the animals have to say to us that is so important that you want to communicate that to your reader?
Well, it starts with a human genius developing an app that allows animals, including insects, mammals, reptiles, birds, fish, to communicate with each other and to communicate with the human being. And after all these millennia, they start trying to figure out what are they going to say, how are they going to be received? And they understand from personal experience that humans want to conquer nature. And they've been wanting to conquer nature. That's the definition of project. Blow open the frontiers and the oceans, et cetera. So they say, let's flatter the human kind. There are billions of people watching 100 hours of global TV, right? And the triad is organized by an elephant, an owl, and a dolphin. They're sort of the impresarios, right? And what they do is, first they say to the human animal, we are beings, sentient beings of multiple intelligence. You think everything we do is instinct, that we can't calculate, we can't have compassion, we can't have foresight, we can't adjust to different things that require an intelligence. And so all these different species start conveying that.
Let me read a quote on that. I got it right here. Sheldon, let's bring this up. Sometimes we start building our nest high in the hollow of a dead tree with its tall trunk still standing. Halfway done, we see that this was not a safe or convenient choice. We stop and select another site. That is not instinct, that is intelligence, which as you study us, you humans that is, will be able to explain better than I can now because you have another kind of intelligence. What's the difference that you're trying to point out here between human intelligence and animal intelligence?
Well, human intelligence has a bigger memory. It's more conceptual, obviously, and science and so forth. But animal intelligence is an incredibly advanced form of survival and reproduction. The ability of whales to communicate, the different sounds, the ability of chickens to have different sounds, the ability of moths to communicate over hundreds of yards, for example, the acuity of the owl's eyesight, the sonar of an owl's eyesight, the accuracy of plunging down for the prey. And all this is a way of saying to human beings, if you conquer us, you're going to conquer yourself. And we are essential to your survival. And if we don't survive, it's because you've destroyed our habitat, which means you've destroyed the livability of air, water, soil. They read the human being as arrogant, obviously, as destructive, as violent prone, as short-sighted, as defeating what the sun has given the earth and all its magnificence, an inorganic entity, the sun. And what they want to convey is, we know you're smart human beings, but you're so smart, you're outsmarting yourself. You're soiling your own nest. You're defeating your own future descendants' ability to live on the planet. And I think it's really a new way of communicating. When I sign this book, Steve, I say, for their voice and our fate, I want to give the animal world right down to across to the insects. Of course, the mosquito, when the mosquito gets on the stage, all the mammals and reptiles are in total awe. I mean, who has finished off more human beings? I mean, so the mosquito has a real hierarchy.
In which case, why did you decide to write this as a fictitious fable as opposed to what, I mean, you're so well known for very heavy-duty nonfiction.
You put the word on, there's a lot of heavy-duty books out there, great books, but they can discourage, they can depress, they can overwhelm, and they can enlighten and motivate. But with a fable, you have the free play of imagination. You can provoke curiosity. You can go where nonfiction doesn't go in terms of the interactions between, like there is a revolt of the insects because they thought they were being shoved off the stage, so to speak. And so they picked the most elaborate insects in this march. And there's an issue on the beauty of the natural world and its denizens as well. So this is why a fable is so important.
Because you can make it's a less didactic way of making a serious point.
Yes, and it also leads to self-discovery by the reader. It really does, because I self-discovered myself. One of the reasons I wrote this book, The Stimulus, I was watching squirrels leap between twigs adhering to different trees. And I've never seen a squirrel miss. Now just imagine, people are walking down sidewalks and they fall down, right? You have these squirrels that leap and the twigs sag and they never miss. And I'm in total awe of that.
That is astonishing.
I just think of the physics involved there.
You don't seem to me, though, to be the type of person who's ever had a pet. So your knowledge of animals and what they do could not have come from that, unless I'm wrong.
No, well, no, I haven't. We had once a rabbit and once a dog, but we really weren't not a pet family, just for a few weeks.
So where did the notion of using animals as the metaphor to make this larger point come from?
I was totally appalled by industrial agriculture, the cramming of chickens and pigs and cattle. And I went to slaughterhouses, Iowa beef once, to see how it's done, the mechanization of it, and the fear in the eyes of the cattle as they were moving toward their slaughter. And then I realized, the more we mistreat these animals, domestic animals, the more we mistreat them, the more hormones we put in them, more antibiotics we put in them, and they transferred right into us. So the mistreatment of animals is boomeranging on us. And now into cloning, for example, now using organs from pigs. We don't know enough, but the commercial force behind it, the Monsanto types, are moving without any legal and ethical framework.
The title of the book is Animal Envy, and it made me wonder, who's envious of whom here?
Well, this is part of the initial strategy of the animal kingdom, flattery. So they wanted to say, we envy all the things you can do, you know, your microscopes and so on. And that's just to open the mind of the human animal that has such a condescending view toward these other animals. But when you see what each of these tell the human animal, the spectacular 6,000-mile flight by this little bird, for example, and it's an attempt to open the mind through animals saying, gee, look what you could do with planes and microscopes and so forth. We can't do that, in order to show them the multiple intelligence of animals, which, by the way, we're learning from. For heaven's sake, the development of radar came off of understanding the way owls at nighttime don't bump into anything.
Let's, in our last couple of minutes here, come full circle, because you like to quote Eugene Debs, ran for president 5 times, candidate for the Socialist Party of America, who said, "My greatest regret is that under our Constitution, the American people can have almost anything they want, but it just seems they don't want much of anything at all." Do you think things are different today from when Debs said that?
Even worse. That's a haunting statement, isn't it? That is after 45 years of laboring, Eugene Debs, great man, ran for president, in jail, got 1 million votes. He was in jail because he just spoke out against World War I. He was right, of course. Now, I think if you look at Western Europe, devastated after World War II, look at the difference in expectation levels. They have, for all their people, health insurance, they have good pensions, they have good public transit, they have 4 to 7 weeks paid vacation, they have paid maternity leave, they have paid family sick leave, they have tuition-free, virtually, universities. We have none of that for all the people in the U.S. Our expectation levels are so low, and Donald Trump is, in effect, going to show how low our expectation level is. Because if we don't raise our expectation level, we're not going to mobilize Democratic forces on Congress, on the executive branch, in order to counteract what is clearly coming.
I heard him in that clip on election night say, "Time to dream big again." Did that give you any comfort?
Yeah, well, remember, he's a fantasy merchant. He was been on TV, gambling, come to Atlantic City, make millions, just the reverse, right? Lose. We have the greatest casinos in the world. They go bankrupt. He jumped ship with gold and leaves his workers and shareholders stranded. You cannot believe Donald Trump. You simply cannot believe what he says. The key issue for the American people is, how do they divide what he says and what he's doing? Because it's what he's doing that they've got to concentrate on. And he's a very insecure man. I think you saw him coming out of the Oval Office with President Obama. Have you ever seen expression of, it was almost fear?
Oh, he was, yeah. It seemed to me as if, boy, I had never considered that before.
Yeah.
Never considered the enormity of the job before. He's as much as admitted that.
Yes, and I think it's Canada's role not to be drawn into the North American security perimeter, F-35s, the military-industrial complex, Canadian soldiers to more military adventures, tagging on to the U.S. empire. Canada has a very important role to play. I wish Lester Pearson were still here. They have a role of peacekeeping, which they're beginning to start under Prime Minister Trudeau.
Yep.
They're increasing the people in the UN devoted to peacekeeping. That's been the tradition before the last few years of Canada. They should not be drawn into this North American security perimeter, because then they start spending more Canadian tax dollars on military, and they can't do infrastructure or other things in Canada. But here's the most important thing they can do. They can take the lead in major peace treaties that the U.S. hasn't even initiated, and I would put number 1, cyber warfare. Now, there is cyber warfare now, back and forth, but it's nothing what it could be. It can shut down the electoral grid. It can mess up critical infrastructure and databases for medicine and so on. They can launch an initiative for 180 nations negotiating a cyber warfare treaty. And that's not going to come from Trump. So we wrote this book in 1993 here called Canada First. Canada's got to be first again.
We'll see if the Prime Minister's listening. We're always grateful when you make time for us here at TVO.
Thank you.
Ralph Nader, thanks so much for visiting us once again.
Thank you, and please read this book.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.